Yeah, so if anybody wants to get the details on that, see Fred afterwards. Obviously, when we're looking at fruit, grapes, obviously we're going to go high. Well, there are two theories on grapes. One is that keep them low, about so high, because then you can walk along and pick them easily. The other is that you take, I take them, well, the ones that we're growing at the moment, we're taking 8 foot high. Because that means I can get 2 rows in. So if you've got the space, take them short, because then you don't have to stretch. But if you haven't got an awful lot of space, do your 2 rows. Hardy kiwi fruit. That's the kiwi Actinidia colomicta. That's the little one. That's the little baby one that's about that size. It's very, very nice, but it does take quite a long time to grow. Mine are now nearly 3 years old, and they're only about so high. So that's something that's a long-term project if anybody wants to try growing kiwi fruit. Melons, obviously, and again, Mr. Mann says, put melons, if you're having a problem with melons on and they're starting to droop off, put a stocking underneath them, an old pair of pantyhose or stocking or whatever, and just actually make a sling for them on the uprights, on the verticals that you bring them. Strawberries can be grown in special vertical pots. I've never had huge success with strawberry pots. They're the ones that you've got so little bits sticking outside, and the roots are supposed to go inwards and the strawberries are supposed to grow outwards. I found that they didn't do particularly well because they dried out, especially when it was a ceramic pot. So I'm not terribly fond of those things, but maybe it was just me. Blackberries and raspberries, no. The hardy, Balsaul's hardy blackberry, beware. If you buy it, it's a beautiful fruiter. It has masses and masses and masses of fruit, but it grows like a wild thing. So you need lots of space for it. And you're going to have to cut it back because it's going to flop. When it flops over and hits the ground, it's going to start growing again. Because that's how it suckers. It just goes, the cane goes plop, and it suckers, and it's off, and it's traveling like those Egyptian onions that I was telling you about last week. And it moves. And they just take over the whole place. So, blackberries, make sure that you've got plenty of space for. And raspberries as well, because you've got to try and keep them fairly under control. And the best thing is to string 2 pieces of wire only about a foot apart, and you grow them up the center of the 2 pieces of, I actually use 16 gauge wire. And, well, I've started using 16 gauge wire, let's put it that way. And you keep them within that space, because otherwise, again, they'll sucker out, and then you won't be able to walk down and pick them, because you're going to have to squeeze through a whole lot of really... And there's the Balsaul's hardy blackberry is a pretty thorny blackberry. There is an American thornless blackberry that they grow down in St. Andrews. I've got a couple in this year. I'll see if they grow. They're said to grow from zone 5B onwards. So if they do, they'll be wonderful, because they're a really big fruited blackberry, and they're very tasty. But they're a bit tricky, especially if you haven't got, good shelter for them. Okay, so trenches. Sometimes trenches are easier to make than raised beds. That's why I use them. They're easier to water. Because they're narrower than the 4x4 raised bed, you've got less wastage. But of course, obviously, where you would normally spread your soil out on your 4x4 bed, you're going deeper with it, so you're still going to have to use a lot of compost. And it means you can concentrate your really rich soil. So that's why we use trenching. And your manures, obviously. The things that like trenches are celery. And it also means that if you dig yourself a trench that's pretty deep, you can blanch as you come up. Because if you're going to blanch your celery, which means that you're going to put your soil up against your celery to make the white part go white instead of having green stick celery, then you've got space in which to do that. Leeks are the same, obviously. The trouble with trenches and leeks is that you often get soil down inside the centre of the leek. Especially when I'm just about to dig them out and it's a heck to clear them out. Sweet peas obviously like being trenched. And all those climate plants we've just looked at as well. And obviously potatoes, it's a slightly different process because you're filling rather than trenching. You're going to plant your potatoes a bit down, and as they grow up, as the plants actually grow up, you're going to fill back so that the tops are up, but your actual potatoes as they form are not out in the sun and going green and getting toxic. Because don't forget, green potatoes are slightly toxic. So be careful with that. Upside down planters. I've never seen one of these before. I found it in an American site, and I thought that was a really neat idea. So obviously they've got a tomato that goes underneath, and they've got a whole lot of herbs on top. So I thought that was really neat, so that's quite something. You can get upside down planters reasonably cheaply for tomatoes and peppers, and even strawberries. I've been given a pepper one for this year for little chili peppers, the small peppers. I'm going to try it and see what happens. But I know that my friend Leah, who is instrumental in a lot of the work that I do, whatever, she's tried outside down planters for tomatoes, and she swears by them, especially the small cherry tomatoes. And yes, there we go. So, by all means, it's another space-saving special. Hang them up somewhere.
I seen some the other day in Dowdy Village, so somebody couldn't have liked them very well.
Oh, right. Well, you are Dowdy Village if you want to try and get them. So, yeah. I think, again, you've got to have plenty of space, though, for your roots, and you've got to feed them on a regular basis, because otherwise they're going to dry out and they're going to just collapse. So beware of having to feed them better. Right, so now on to disease resistance. We've got about 15 minutes left. So I'm going to have to really fly through this. Resistance comes from being proactive rather than reactive. So we've got to have healthy soil, you've got to have healthy plants, which you can correct them. If they're not that healthy, you can correct by feeding them. They've got to have air. Now that's the only criticism I have of the square foot planting method, is that sometimes they're really squashed up, and if we get a really, really wet summer like we had last year, if you don't have enough air space around your plants, you're going to have the wilts, the molds, the rusts, the whatever else is. The way to get around that is that most of the leaves that are somewhere down near the bottom, especially the tomatoes, you don't need them. Take them off. You need the top ones, which are catching the sun. The ones at the bottom are not catching the sun because they haven't got space to catch the sun. Take them off. And take them right away. Don't just leave them lying there and think they'll rot off, because they will rot, but they might get all sorts of problems. So take them right away, especially with things like tomatoes, Brussels sprouts. If you're getting lots of leaves coming up where you actually want the stem of Brussels sprouts to come out, take those bottom leaves off, leave just the top leaves. Okay? So, air, you must have air. That's why correct spacing is important. You need a weed-free space, because after all, weeds are robbers. They're going to steal food. They're going to steal light, they're going to steal air, they're going to steal water. And those are the four things that you don't want any plant stealing from your good plants. And obviously enough water. Too water and too much water can be just as dangerous as each other. Powdery mildew comes from being too little watered. The other mildew, anyway, it comes from too much water. So, I can't think. Sorry, my brain's just not really with it at the moment. Okay, so deficiencies. Now, this is actual deficiencies in trace elements. We talked briefly about trace elements, and I'm going to talk more about it next week. Not next week, after Easter, because we don't have a meeting next week. Next week is Monday, Thursday, so it's a church evening, okay? Somebody says, oh yes, I know that one. That's what happened to mine. I couldn't work out why my squashes, my zucchini were doing the top one last year. It's actually a calcium deficiency, which then allows that rot to happen. That's called blossom end rot. But it stems from a calcium deficiency. So it often looks like a disease. Droopy yellow leaves that curl inwards, especially on fruit trees, leaves the wrong colour, plants that droop, buds that won't fill out, fruits that are rotting like with that blossom end rot. Those are all actually deficiencies in your soil. That's why I do this alfalfa mix, because that alfalfa has actually got 15 different trace elements in it on its own, and then you get the magnesium, and you get the boron, and you get the calcium with it. So you need to feed trace elements and minerals if any of these things happen, because it could be that you're deficient rather than diseased. So there is a difference between the two. There are lots of sites about deficiencies and which bits to feed and what other trace elements to use. Watering. Never water in the heat of the day. It's best to water in the evening or, well, preferably in the evening, because then the plants have the whole night to absorb and the soil doesn't immediately just leach out the water. Never use very, very cold water. Try and use tepid water, lukewarm water, whatever. It's preferable to water around the roots and not overhead. In fact, studies in Death Valley and in Israel have found that they no longer use these huge irrigation systems that they used to use with the big booms, because they caused the Death Valley being as hot as it is. It's 120 in the shade, 120 Fahrenheit, which is something like 48.6 to 60. We get to 33 here and we think we're wilting. Poor plants. Overhead watering, if it gets onto the leaves, as I said before, it's a prism. Water is a prism, and it'll burn the leaves if you've got direct sun onto those leaves. And it also brings out some of the mildews and the rusts and the wilts and whatever. So water around the roots, and if you can get yourself just a couple of lengths of the drip irrigation hose, which is not expensive, and just link into that. It's wonderful because that will drip on a fairly permanent basis, and that's what your plants need. They need water to go down, otherwise it's going to start turning those roots back up to the surface, and they're not going to get as well fed. So use saucer-shaped depressions around plants. Now there are two theories about that. One is that that's a good thing to do. The other is that it causes a rot just when the stem goes into the ground. So just be a little bit careful about that. You don't want it too deep. You don't want it too deep so that the water actually stands directly around that stem, because otherwise you might get a rot in the stem. You can you can get your liquid fertilizers mixed in at the same time as you're watering. So you're adding your alfalfa tea mix or your compost teas or whatever at that time when you're watering. So that's quite useful. Otherwise, you're having to water in your granular. Well, if anybody uses phosphates and things like that, the petrochemical fertilizers. That granule doesn't break down until you've got it pretty well soaked. But please, try not to use them. Petrochemical fertilizers are not good, basically. They're good short-term, they might be good, but then long-term they are killing off, because that petrol left, that residue is left in the ground, and you're killing some really good nematodes and microbes in the ground. So it's not good to use it.